It was supposed to be a routine Senate oversight hearing, dull, predictable, filled with rehearsed talking points and polite grandstanding. But no one in that chamber, and certainly not Senator John Kennedy, was ready for what was about to happen. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had just taken her seat, folders stacked, eyes sharp, posture unshaken. Across from her sat Kennedy, Southern charm, sly grin, and a stack of insinuations dressed as questions. From the second she walked in, he had that look, the one older politicians give when they think they've cornered someone young, smart, and black. "Now listen here, darlin'," Kennedy drawled, leaning back with an air of smug superiority. The room tensed. Cameras clicked. Even seasoned staffers glanced up from their laptops. He had said it. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't even raise her voice. "Senator," she said, cool as steel, "I'm not your sweetheart, your darlin', or anyone you get to diminish with syrup while serving me disrespect." Her voice echoed like a gavel strike. "I came here with facts. And you came with Southern sugar and 1950s condescension." The silence was deafening. Kennedy tried to recover with a forced chuckle, but it fell flat. Jasmine leaned forward, eyes locked on his, unbothered and unbowed. "You can call me Congresswoman Crockett. But today, I'll be the one calling out your record, on voting rights, on women's healthcare, and on the billionaires you keep protecting." She opened her folder. The first document? A signed letter, Kennedy's own words, blocking a maternal healthcare bill. Behind it, photos of protests, charts of declining women's health in his state, and a statement from a woman who died waiting for care. The hearing had turned. This wasn't a debate. It was a reckoning. And Jasmine Crockett had just claimed the floor. Senator Kennedy blinked slowly, once, twice, like a man trying to reboot after being hit with a truth bomb he didn't see coming. The smirk had vanished. His team shifted nervously behind him, eyes darting to each other, fingers hovering over tablets. They knew. This wasn't going to be business as usual. But Jasmine wasn't done. Not even close. As of last year, she continued, sliding a bar graph across the table, Louisiana had the highest maternal mortality rate in the entire country. And yet, you voted against expanding Medicaid coverage for postpartum women, twice. Kennedy tried to interject. "Congresswoman, I think you're..." "No," Jasmine cut in, not with volume, but with clarity that sliced through the room. "You don't get to think your way out of the facts, Senator. You're not confused. You're complicit." The chamber was frozen. The C-SPAN feed had already caught fire on social media. Commentators were scrambling to clip the moment. Staffers were exchanging texts like wildfire. But inside that room, the energy was electric. Everyone felt it, the power shift. Jasmine pulled up another document. "And about voting rights, should we talk about your support for voter ID laws that disproportionately suppress black voters? Or how you called attempts to expand ballot access ridiculous?" Kennedy straightened, grasping for his old defense, folksy misdirection. "I just think people oughta show who they are when they vote." Jasmine nodded once, then responded with fire behind her calm. "And I think elected officials oughta show who they are when they pass laws, because behind your Southern charm is a system that's terrified of real democracy." Boom. Gasps. Audible murmurs. A senator in the back actually shifted his chair away from Kennedy. The look on Kennedy's face said it all. The script had flipped, and he had no lines left. Jasmine leaned back now, relaxed, commanding the floor with the grace of someone who knew exactly what she came to do, and who came armed with more than charm. This wasn't just a rebuttal. This was a dismantling. And it was only the beginning. By the time the third chart hit the screen, Kennedy's posture had collapsed into something more defensive than dignified. His hands, once confidently folded, now gripped the sides of the desk like a man bracing for an oncoming storm he no longer believed he could control. Jasmine turned, her tone measured, not mocking, but absolutely merciless. "You sat on the Judiciary Committee and asked black nominees if they believed in God, as if that determined their legal worth. You called systemic racism a myth and laughed while doing it." Gasps. Again. Jasmine didn't even flinch. "But let's talk about belief, Senator," she continued. Because I believe in a justice system that's fair. I believe in voting access that's equal. I believe in a country that doesn't just talk about liberty but actually practices it. Do you? The room was dead quiet. Kennedy stared at her, but his words didn't come. So Jasmine stepped forward. You say you love the Constitution, but only when it works for you. You say you support life, but not when it means supporting black mothers. You say you support democracy, but you've backed gerrymandered maps and closed polling sites across Louisiana. A few reporters in the gallery scribbled so fast their pens clattered. This isn't a courtroom trick or a viral soundbite, Senator, she added, leaning in. This is a reckoning. Kennedy opened his mouth, searching for his next quip, but Jasmine beat him to it. You want to pretend this is about policy? Fine. Then let's talk policy. Let's talk about how your state is ranked 49th in education, 47th in healthcare, and 1st in incarcerating black men. That's your report card. Not mine. Silence. One aide in the back stifled a cough. No one dared breathe too loudly. Kennedy blinked again. But Jasmine just smiled, calm, cool, and lethal. You wanted to talk, Senator. So talk. Because this is what accountability actually sounds like. And in that moment, it became painfully clear. Kennedy wasn't just losing the debate. He was being documented. Kennedy adjusted his tie, clearing his throat like a man trying to buy himself time, seconds, maybe, to recover what little ground he had left. But Jasmine gave him none. She stepped forward again, this time holding up the document she'd been saving. I thought maybe you forgot, she said calmly, but let me remind you what you said last year during a hearing on voting rights. You looked straight at the camera and said, I don't see what the fuss is. We're not preventing people from voting, we're just making sure they do it legally. She let the quote hang in the air. Let's be real, Jasmine added, turning to the audience. That's coded language for, make it harder for black and brown folks to vote. And you know it. You've known it. Kennedy chuckled nervously, the kind of laugh that's more a confession than a rebuttal. But Jasmine wasn't done. She walked toward the center of the floor, her heels echoing like a gavel with every step. You've introduced over a dozen bills aimed at reducing ballot drop boxes. You've supported strict voter ID laws in a state where nearly 30% of eligible black voters don't have state-issued ID. You've gerrymandered districts so precisely you could cut cake with the lines. Reporters now stood. Phones were recording. Social media was lighting up. Jasmine looked back at Kennedy. You say you're protecting democracy. But from whom, Senator? From voters who don't look like you? From people who believe different than you? Or is it just that you're terrified of what happens when everyone gets a voice? Kennedy's lips pressed into a thin, pale line. No quips, no wit. Just silence. And that was when Jasmine did the unthinkable. She set down the folder of documents, and invited him to respond. Go ahead, she said softly. If anything I've said is wrong, correct me. If any number is inaccurate, call it out. If I've misrepresented your record, defend it. A full 10 seconds passed. He didn't say a word. And that silence? It roared. Because in that moment, America wasn't watching a debate. They were witnessing a political obituary, written live. Kennedy finally spoke, but his voice had lost all its edge. Well, Congresswoman, I suppose we just have different views of the world. Jasmine blinked once. Then twice. And when she responded, it wasn't loud, it was surgical. No, Senator. We don't just have different views of the world. We're living in different realities. I live in a world where my constituents are jailed for a broken tail light, evicted over a $200 rent increase, or lose access to voting because their polling place moved 30 miles away without notice. She paused. You live in a world where that's called freedom. The gallery erupted again, not with noise, but with tension. It was electric. Every camera lens, every eye in the room locked on her. This wasn't just a clash of ideologies. It was a reckoning between comfort and consequence. You call it law and order, but what you mean is silence and submission. You call it small government, but what you mean is less help for the poor and fewer protections for women. You call it heritage, but what you mean is hiding behind flags when the truth gets uncomfortable. Kennedy leaned back, visibly rattled now. Jasmine didn't stop. You ever wonder why people don't trust Congress anymore? She asked. It's because when folks like you smile into cameras and say things like, "We just want fair elections," what they feel is that you're cutting them out. She stepped closer, no theatrics, just truth. You voted against certifying the 2020 election. You voted against the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And now, you want to stand there and tell me it's just a difference of opinion? Kennedy shifted, uncomfortably tugging at his blazer. Jasmine's voice dropped to a near whisper, but somehow carried more weight than ever. No, Senator. What we have is not a disagreement. It's a contradiction. I'm fighting for a democracy that works for everyone. You're fighting to make sure it doesn't. And just like that, the room changed. This wasn't just political theater. This was truth in real time. And Kennedy? He didn't just look defeated. He looked exposed. Kennedy shifted in his seat like the weight of the moment had finally caught up to him. His fingers twitched against the polished desk, but his mouth stayed shut. Because what could he say? That Jasmine Crockett was wrong? She had facts. She had receipts. And more than that, she had people behind her. That's when Jasmine turned, not to Kennedy, but to the audience watching across the country. This isn't about me and Senator Kennedy, she said, her voice steady. This is about you. The ones watching from Baton Rouge to Baltimore. From Dallas to Detroit. You've been told your vote doesn't matter. That your voice is too loud. Too angry. Too late. She leaned on the lectern now, anchoring herself in the moment. But what they're really afraid of, she continued, is that you'll realize how much power you've had all along. She held up the redistricting map, a map Kennedy had helped approve. A map that carved up communities like a butcher with no mercy. This isn't a policy disagreement. This is a strategy. A deliberate, surgical effort to dilute your power, fracture your voice, and redraw your future to fit their comfort. A wave of hushed voices swept through the press section. Some reporters were already typing furiously. Others just stared, stunned. And then Jasmine did what only a few dare do on live national television. She called the game. Y'all want to talk about stolen elections? She asked, eyebrows raised. Let's talk about stolen districts. Let's talk about how black voters are crammed into one district while white suburbs get split 5 ways. Let's talk about how y'all scream, fraud, but only when you're losing. She turned to Kennedy one last time. You want to lecture me about democracy? Try living in it. The room was a powder keg. And Jasmine had just lit the fuse. She didn't yell. She didn't rant. She just told the truth. And made sure everyone heard it. By the time the camera panned back to Kennedy, he was motionless. Red-faced. Blinking like a man who just realized the rules had changed, and he was no longer in control of the room. Jasmine wasn't just challenging a senator. She was rewriting the narrative, on live television. The silence after Jasmine's last words wasn't just awkward, it was volcanic. You could feel it in your teeth. Kennedy's staff glanced at each other nervously from the sidelines, and a producer backstage frantically gestured for a commercial break. But this wasn't TV anymore. This was truth on trial. Jasmine stepped back, letting the weight of her words hang like smoke. She didn't need to fill the air, she owned it. Every camera, every microphone, every stunned viewer at home, they were all locked in. And then came the pivot. A moment only someone like Jasmine Crockett could deliver. You know what scares them the most? She asked, gesturing toward the dais without naming names. It's not protests. It's not even votes. It's clarity. Clarity about what's been taken. About who's really been protected. About how power keeps recycling itself unless someone interrupts the pattern. She turned toward the audience again, her tone sharpened but never shouted. Because while they strip Medicaid, cut food programs, and ban books that tell our history, they hope you're too tired, too broke, too distracted to notice what else they're doing. Like keeping Epstein's files sealed. Like shielding billionaires while criminalizing the poor. Like redrawing maps and calling it democracy. That one line, delivered without blinking, sent a chill through the studio. Kennedy tried to interrupt, tried to speak, but Jasmine raised her hand gently. I listened to you, Senator. You're going to listen to me. He froze. And so did America. The GOP talks about law and order, but look around, law for them, order for us. Y'all want us to respect the system while you rig it behind closed doors. That's not order. That's oppression in a three-piece suit. And then she did something no one expected. She pulled out a small photo. It was of a young voter, a teenager from Texas, whose district had been erased overnight by the latest redistricting scheme. She drove 40 minutes to vote in 2020. In 2022, her precinct didn't exist. And now you want to tell her to trust the system? Jasmine's voice softened, but her fire only burned hotter. You're not losing power because people are cheating, Senator. You're losing it because people are waking up. And somewhere, deep in Kennedy's stoic expression, you could see it. He knew she was right. Kennedy finally leaned forward, his southern drawl trying to mask the discomfort in his eyes. Well, Congresswoman, he began, voice tight, this ain't about race. It's about fairness. About preserving our institutions. Jasmine let out a slow breath, then smiled. That kind of smile that says I've been waiting for you to say that. You're right, Senator, she said, nodding. It is about fairness. So let's talk about what your version of fairness looks like. She held up a series of documents. Not classified. Not secret. Just buried, under bureaucracy and political spin. Your version of fairness lets billionaires write tax codes while minimum wage workers get audited by the IRS. Your version of fairness allows courts to be packed, but accuses us of overreach when we demand representation. The air crackled again. But Jasmine wasn't finished. You want institutions preserved? How about the institution of truth? Of accountability? You didn't mind digging into Hunter Biden's laptop, but when we ask for Epstein's files, suddenly it's ongoing litigation or national security? Come on. She dropped the papers on the table with a soft thud. The microphones picked it up, crisp and clear. You say this isn't about race. But funny how race always ends up at the bottom of the budget, the back of the line, or out of the district altogether. The silence this time wasn't from shock, it was from surrender. Kennedy had walked into a chess match thinking he was playing checkers. Jasmine adjusted the mic. Let me explain something about fairness, Senator, she said, voice firm but calm. Fairness isn't when you win every time. Fairness is when everyone gets the same chance to win. And right now? This system's built to make sure we never do. A camera caught Kennedy blinking, eyes heavy with the realization that this wasn't just a debate. It was a reckoning. Just when the room thought it had heard the final blow, Jasmine reached down and grabbed one last file. This, she said, holding it up, is the one you've all been avoiding. The one that didn't make it to Fox News. The one the GOP buried so deep, they hoped no one would notice. Kennedy shifted in his seat. This document, Jasmine continued, details a series of redistricting proposals, ones drafted not by citizens, not by civil rights commissions, but by corporate lobbyists and party operatives. It wasn't about representation. It was about consolidation. Of power. Of whiteness. Of control. You could hear the breath leave the room. Jasmine's tone grew quieter, but somehow sharper. They carved up communities like chessboards. Split historically black neighborhoods into fragments so no single vote could count for more than a whisper. You call that democracy? She looked directly at Kennedy. Texas didn't redraw maps to reflect change. It redrew them to erase it. Kennedy tried to speak, tried to twist the narrative, but Jasmine cut in, voice unwavering. You can't gaslight the people forever. You can't keep screaming about fraud while rigging the rules behind closed doors. This is the moment when we stop pretending your version of America works for everyone. And then she paused. Deliberately. Powerfully. My grandfather marched for the right to vote. He was beaten for daring to believe his voice mattered. And now you sit there, telling me we should be grateful for a system that still finds ways to silence us? Jasmine turned her body slightly to the camera, speaking now not just to Kennedy, but to America itself. If you're more outraged by my words than by the maps you rigged, the files you sealed, and the power you hoard, then maybe you're not scared of losing your country. Maybe you're scared of finally sharing it. The crowd didn't cheer. It didn't need to. It just listened, like the entire country had leaned in. And for once, the truth didn't whisper. It roared. The hearing was over. At least, on paper. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't stood just to participate. She'd stood to draw a line. And now, as the lights dimmed slightly and the camera zoomed in, that line glowed red-hot across the chamber floor. Senator Kennedy sat silent, his usual down-home charm replaced by a vacant stare. The talking points had run out. The spin was hollow. The spectacle had backfired. Jasmine stood calmly, no theatrics, no shouting. Just presence. Power. Precision. Let the record show, she said, her voice cutting clean through the tension, we aren't asking for special treatment. We're demanding equal ground. We're not begging for fairness, we're taking it back. She turned to the committee chair. And if this body refuses to investigate the weaponization of redistricting, the suppression of truth, and the cover-up of abuse? Then we will. Outside the chamber, social media had already exploded. #CrockettStrikesBack trended within minutes. Clips of her takedown hit every platform, spliced with maps, stats, and moments where Kennedy's face couldn't hide the truth. Young voters posted, "That's our voice." Organizers shared, "She didn't flinch. She led." Even some moderate conservatives posted just one word, respect. Inside, a Capitol staffer whispered to another, this wasn't a hearing. This was history. Jasmine gathered her papers, calm as ever, and as she turned to leave, she paused for just a second, looked straight into the camera and delivered one last truth. You can gerrymander the map. But you can't redraw me. And with that, she walked out, not just of the room, but into a moment that would echo far beyond those marble walls. Because Crockett didn't just confront Kennedy. She cracked the foundation. And now, everyone knew it. When Jasmine Crockett stood her ground against Senator John Kennedy, it wasn't just about Texas. It was about every community silenced by a pen, every vote diluted by design, every voice erased by power. She didn't come to play political theater. She came to tear down the stage built on hypocrisy, and she did it with facts, fire, and fearless truth. While Kennedy leaned on charm and spin, Jasmine wielded history, law, and lived reality. And when he tried to bury the truth beneath tired deflections, she unearthed it in front of the entire country. This wasn't just a clash of parties. It was a clash of purpose. And Jasmine made it clear. You can't silence what's already awakened. So ask yourself, whose America do you want to live in? The one drawn in backrooms? Or the one that stood in that chamber today, and didn't blink? Because if this hearing proved anything, it's this. Jasmine Crockett isn't here to participate in the system. She's here to rewrite it.